to Guided Souls. I am your host, Katie, otherwise known as Guided Soul Katie on TikTok, and I am so excited to be back here for another episode this week. If you haven't already and you're enjoying this podcast, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It helps me more than you know. And if you want to be a real rock star, you can do that on both Spotify and Apple Podcasts. But this podcast is slowly but surely growing. It means so much to me to have the support that I do. So thank you to everyone who has been listening and supporting. It means the world to me. I'm so excited for today's episode. I had the absolute privilege of sitting down with Roshni, and you may know them as at Beatty Grew Up on TikTok, but they actually just rebranded to at blacksheepexperience.com. Roshni is a self-worth coach, specifically honing in on the Black Sheep experience, what it means to be the Black Sheep, and building up your self-worth after having grown up in a household where you felt like and were treated like the Black Sheep. They also do tarot readings, and you may see a lot of those on TikTok. But if you would like to book either self-worth coaching or a tarot reading or both with Roshni, you can go to blacksheepexperience.com, and you can also find them on TikTok and Instagram at blacksheepexperience.com. I think this episode is really timely since the holidays are right around the corner. So many of us are going home for the holidays, and Roshni gives such amazing concrete steps that we can take in order to help protect our energy and to keep ourselves feeling, in that place of self-love and self-worth, even if we are in a place that maybe doesn't necessarily foster those feelings for us. So especially if you are going home for the holidays or you're going to be around family and that's something that brings you anxiety, definitely make sure that you listen and take notes to all of the wonderful wisdom that Roshni has to offer. So I hope you enjoy. Roshni, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the pod.
Thanks so much for having me.
I've been really excited to connect with you. There are a lot of different tarot readers on TikTok, and I myself, dabble in some tarot on TikTok. But one of the things that really drew me to you and your account was a lot of this focus on the Black Sheep journey. And I think most people probably have somewhat of an idea of, what it means to be the Black Sheep, but it seems like you've kind of really dove into that. And I'd love to just hear from you. What is the Black Sheep journey, and why is it something that you feel drawn to and that you focus on?
Absolutely. I love that question. So, this really kind of organically started through my own healing journey. I realized when I was a post grad after college, I wasn't really getting along with most of my friends. A lot of us had big falling outs, and I was going from this journey of drinking a lot or using substances to then realizing I don't want to go down this path, and it's getting really scary and bad. And I was in a new relationship, which was really kind of the first genuinely positive thing I'd been in for a long, long time. And so it was through this journey that I kind of started diving in and wondering, why do I have all these problems? What's wrong with me and my friendships? Why have I seen these certain patterns of life going a certain way over and over and over again? And through that journey, I really just discovered self-worth. And I discovered that it wasn't that I had separate problems with friends and then separate problems with substances and separate problems with work. It was all connected, and it was all coming from one source, and that source was low self-worth. I didn't believe that I was worthy enough to stand up and communicate to my friends when they were treating me badly. I didn't. And so all these things ended up compiling, and I just bottled things in for years and years. I didn't know how to communicate. I didn't know anything about boundaries. And so because of that, I kept getting myself into these situations where I just was not valued. And because of that, I, was on this healing journey of growing my self-worth for a few years. And it wasn't until, and this was when I was maybe I would say maybe 23, maybe a little bit before that, but it wasn't until I was almost 26, 27 during the pandemic. And that's when I started to realize, wow, there's a lot of connections between my low self-worth and how I was treated as a child. And that's where the Black Sheep journey and the Black Sheep experience really started opening up. And I started studying about narcissistic parents and toxic, family structures and dynamics. And I'm an only child, so I also don't have any siblings to like validate what I went through. So the gaslighting and all of that was such a mind warp that I had to unravel on my own. And so realizing this and starting to talk about it, and at this time, I'd also was losing my grandfather, who was my last living grandparent, to stage 4 cancer. And so, I went and I stayed with him, and I was so honest with him about my life and what I was doing, and just my business and all these things. And closer to the end of our trip, he basically was reaching out to other people and telling me that everything in my life was wrong. My job was wrong. My partner was wrong. My business was wrong. I was wrong. And I love him dearly and I miss him a lot, but it was really difficult that was basically our last like in-person interaction. And from there, I kind of just started spiraling and figuring out like I might need to go no contact with my family. I really need to take a step back. Like this is why I feel like I keep going in these cycles is I work on myself where I live, and then I go home for a visit and it's all, it starts all over again. And even during the pandemic, I would notice like because I had so much more time to myself and time at home, it would take me sometimes 2 weeks to recover from one phone call with my parents. And just knowing that this is holding me back so deeply really started me on this journey of uncovering the Black Sheep experience. And the final thing is I started talking about it online and just kind of organically sharing. And I realized that so many other people are going through this as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I think a lot of people who are on a spiritual journey or who have recently kind of woken up to spirituality can really relate to feeling like the black sheep. And especially if people have grown up a certain way and their parents don't agree with, the spiritual things that they're doing. And I guess did there come a point in time where you were able to sort of come to at least a place of understanding with your family, or did you just decide like, hey, I got to take some space for a certain period of time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really needed that space. I took space for actually about a couple of years. I just got home from visiting my family, and it was the first time I'd seen anyone in person for over 2 years. And the time before that, I was there for my grandfather's funeral. So that was, extenuating circumstances and also really difficult. And of course, a time that I felt like I had to be there, and I'm glad I was there for that. But this trip home was the first time that I had a somewhat decent experience with my parents, but there was also a lot of things that we didn't talk about. And I think, it was okay for me to leave it at that. And I was surprised at how positive the experience was with them. But it confirmed a couple of things for me. And the first one was that I did make the right choice by stepping away. If I hadn't, then we wouldn't be here right now. But also that even though the experience was positive, that's still throwing me a little bit for a loop because there's still not an apology of how things were for all of these years. There's not really an acknowledgement of that. That was one of the things that we didn't talk about is our actual relationship. And so, I think I was just posting a video on this today, actually, about how visiting your family or your parents or whatever it is can really dysregulate your nervous system. And that's kind of exactly what I'm feeling right now. I've been feeling overwhelmed and more stressed and more anxious than usual and kind of more off than I have been feeling all year. And I know it's because of just these things that are unsaid and grief as well, of like grieving like, yeah, it's positive now, but it wasn't for so long, and it wasn't when I needed them to be when I was a child, so how do I let that sit in my own body, and how do I begin to process those emotions?
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting timing. I was just home for Thanksgiving, and I actually moved semi recently away from my hometown, just like 6 months ago. And this was the first time I had been there for a week, and it was rough. It was like just a lot of old memories coming back up. And so I've definitely, since I've been back home, I've been trying to become more grounded and centered. But it's just this really interesting thing, specifically, I think around the holidays. A lot of people deal with this, like a lot of emotions and charged, and maybe they have memories from when they were a kid of holidays not going well, but they want to spend time with their parents. But it's like, I don't know, it just feels like a very loaded time. And even though there's like a lot of joy for a lot of people, there's also a lot of sadness that surrounds it.
Absolutely. And it's just so tough to hold space for both parts, both experiences, you know what I mean? Because people with trauma in general, and especially Black sheep, have this tendency towards black and white thinking. And I've been struggling with that really all year and trying to really unpack that and show myself that there is space for emotional nuance. Because obviously, consciously, we know that. But when it comes to emotions, it's separating things as good or bad, or separating things as painful or joyful. And so there's so many emotions that exist in between those two experiences. And so having this feeling of like, this trip was great and I got along better with my parents than I have before, but at the same time, like, that doesn't just translate to everything's perfect, and that doesn't translate to, I'm like, I know what to do with myself, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. Like it still kind of feels like I'm floating in space and trying to figure out some sense of grounding when it comes to this relationship with family. And so it's just creating that emotional space for nuance is really, really big. And it can almost feel like you're not being validated. Like the past version of you isn't validated because they went through so many bad things. And maybe this time it's better. Or maybe you remember positive things from childhood and now all you're experiencing is the negative. And so it's really hard on you emotionally, especially with such a close relationship like your parents or your family. It's hard to get a bird's eye view on that kind of relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think especially, I mean, you said it yourself, not having any siblings, not having anyone to turn to and be like, "Hey, do you see this too?" That must have been really difficult. And it's interesting that you noticed these are patterns throughout your whole life. Like maybe they stemmed from childhood, but then you kind of went on this black sheep journey through friendships and work and other relationships. How did that manifest in your other relationships?
That's such a good question. I mean, really, I would say the biggest thing is recognizing when people were treating me badly,
Mm.
being strong enough to understand that my own feelings were valid when I was feeling hurt or feeling sad or feeling angry, not being able to communicate or even name those emotions, and then not being able to set boundaries and actually enforce those boundaries with the people around me. And so that really ruined a lot of my friendships. Is I would be talked to a certain way. Like, for example, one of my college best friends, like we hit it off immediately and we had so much fun together and we would go on hikes and things like that. But if I had to stop to tie my shoes, like she would yell at me, and I'm just like, I don't like, but I was so used to it. I was used to being yelled at for every little thing. So even though it hurt my feelings, like I just existed in a world of hurt. It wasn't like, oh, I'm happy and now I'm not. I was always in pain. And so, not being able to understand like that this is abnormal, that the way that I'm being treated isn't right, and that I am allowed to feel hurt and I am allowed to communicate that, and I am allowed to take a step away from all of these friendships and all of these relationships and do what's best for me. Like none of that existed in my vocabulary at all. And so, that's just one of the ways. And then even with jobs and things like that, I would always feel like I'm in trouble. I would always feel like behind. And a lot of those are just trauma responses of urgency and just feeling like, you're constantly doing something wrong. And that also led me to maybe not discussing that enough with my bosses, or not like feeling valid enough in my concerns to express them, and instead just either taking it until I burst or just quitting and leaving and not being able to benefit from a positive work experience or work environment.
Yeah, I think work is such a tricky one. Particularly because it's like, it is a business setting and you want to be able to voice your opinions and your standards, but then there's also that fear of like, oh, they could fire me, you know? And I definitely, when I was working more of a corporate job, found myself reading into every little thing, every email, every facial. I worked remotely. So it was like, people's facial expressions, which like they might have been doing something totally different, but I like saw their face. It was like, oh my gosh, I did something. They're mad at me, and it's like the amount of stress that I caused myself that maybe wasn't there at all was a lot. I was like very, very anxious working the jobs that I did before doing this.
Same. Yeah, it's hard to not enter that state of anxiety. And I think a big part of it is having this authoritarian figure over you. As an adult, there's not a lot of people you really have to answer to. And sometimes it's, your partner or your relationship or even your children. But it's like those were choices for the most part. Like you choose who your partner is and things like that. But when it's a work environment and you get hired and you have no control over who's around you and you feel almost like you're this is like such a dramatic word, but almost like hostage, like whether you're in the office or at your desk working from home, like you can't do other things. You don't have that control over where you are physically or what you're doing. All of these things are deep, deep triggers because in the Black Sheep experience, like you don't choose who your parents are. You don't choose how they treat you. You don't choose where you live. You have no control as a child over really anything. And for a lot of us, especially as as we grew into teenagers and things like that, we start to recognize that we're not being treated well, or we start to stand up for ourselves, or if we're too afraid to stand up for ourselves, we stand up for our siblings and, want to speak up for them. And you're actively told not to do those things, or you get in trouble for speaking up, for standing up for yourself. And so how are we supposed to navigate that as children who don't even have, fully developed brains, and then translating that into the only other experience we have as adults that reflects that directly, that it becomes really difficult to find your voice in that. And just like your deepest fear as children is being ostracized by your parents, is how your parents are going to treat you, that reflects the fear of being fired, this fear of being left out in the cold, left out in the rain, like Five of Pentacles energy. But that's the direct translation. And so I think work is really, really difficult for Black Sheep. Like we're either super overachievers and then burn out, or we just kind of go from like cycle to cycle and stay in like a similar income box or stay in a similar pattern that isn't leaving us feeling fulfilled.
Yeah. I've truly never made that connection, but that makes so much sense and is super eye-opening to be like, yeah, if we weren't allowed to do that as kids, how the heck do people just expect us to know how to do that as adults? Like if we spent our whole lives not standing up for ourselves, and then we're just meant to be adults and know how to do it, but know how to do it in the right way, in the professional way, in the respectful way. It's like, yeah, I've never made that connection before. That's very insightful. So you do a lot of work around self-worth coaching. I know your podcast has a lot to do with self-worth. This may be a difficult question to answer, but I guess when you first started coming online to all of these things about like, oh, I shouldn't be treated this way, like this isn't right. What were some of the steps that you took to kind of build up your self-worth? And I'm thinking like if someone's listening to this right now and they have like a little inkling that, hey, I feel like I'm not being treated right, but I don't know how to make myself feel worthy. Like where do you even start with that?
Yeah, that's such a powerful question. The main thing that I did is start showing up for myself. It's going to take time to be able to effectively and productively communicate to other people and all of these things, but self-trust, self-respect, and self-worth are so connected, and they're kind of like this divine trinity in my work. And showing up for yourself or making little promises, right? It could be as simple as like going for a walk every single day, promising yourself that, and then showing up and doing it. That builds self-trust, that builds self-respect, because you're making yourself do something that is good for you. You're dealing with the discomfort of having to go work out or going on that walk, but at the same time, you're doing it because at the end of it, you know you're going to feel better. You know you're showing up for yourself, and you know that you're starting to invest in your future self instead of only just worrying about your current comfort, right? And so, showing up for yourself in just one small way, if you can make one small promise, maybe a daily promise or maybe a weekly thing, and really just starting from there. And through these like walks or workouts or even time creatively or solo dates or whatever it is that you want to promise yourself, that time also creates space for stillness within you, right? Having a little bit of time to let the anger come up, having time to let the grief come up. Like you could be, at a museum and then going out for like a coffee afterwards by yourself and just feel horrifically sad and just feel so alone and so awful. But that's part of the process, right? And that's really what the dark night of the soul is. It's this feeling of, I'm finally opening the doors to everything I've repressed for my entire life. And it's not easy, but and that's especially why I recommend like having some sort of container or someone there, a therapist, a healer, a coach, someone just for some of that time to be able to kind of hold space for you and remind you who you are in those moments, because it is so easy to get lost in this period. And but at the same time, you're doing like the most important thing you could ever do for yourself, right? And so finding that support is really key. But showing up in little ways and being consistent with it,
Yeah.
experiencing those emotions and sitting with them and letting yourself just kind of have space to express what's coming up without judgment.
Right. Right. I love the idea of starting with actions, and then that will in turn build trust within yourself and show yourself that you're showing up for yourself and that you are worthy. Because I think it can be simple to just say, oh, you're worthy, like, believe it. And then it's like, okay, well, if I could just do that, then I wouldn't be, here with a coach or something like that. So I think the fact that you give really concrete steps of like, okay, we're going to start small. We're going to do this. You're going to build trust with yourself. And I think particularly, like you said, if it can be um, some sort of activity where your mind can kind of like go on autopilot a little bit. That's kind of what I do a lot with channeling, is like I'll get messages when I'm just like folding laundry, And so I think a lot of beautiful insights and emotional releases can come in when we just allow our minds to be quiet and we're not constantly listening to a podcast or like have the TV on. I think that quiet is really where a lot of beautiful insights and releases can happen.
Absolutely. And something that I used to always say, I have a course specifically for South Asian femmes, learning how to trust themselves, because South Asian women and femmes are really taught the exact opposite. But something that I say in that course all the time is that self-worth is the belief and self-trust is the action. And so they really work in tandem, but having that physical, concrete evidence of like, I showed up for myself all of these days. I have the steps in my phone to prove it, or I have the pictures or whatever it is, like that feeling of showing up for yourself and doing something that you're not told to do, doing something that you're not forced to do by your boss, by your parent, by your partner, by your kids. That is really where that self-love like starts to kind of butt up, and you're like, wait, okay, I am a person, I have autonomy, I have agency, I have respect for myself. All of these beautiful things can start blooming from something so simple.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things I've realized this year as I've started to put myself out there more online and start doing things like this is I'm just like confronting so many fears from childhood and old beliefs and limiting beliefs that were, put on me. And I've worked through a lot of them, and I feel much better about the place that I'm in. But even yesterday, I was just interviewing someone who they were so gracious, but they were very knowledgeable. And I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm like an imposter. Who am I to be like, interviewing this person? And it's like, where did that come from? And I don't know. Sometimes I'm just like do we ever get to the point where those aren't going to come up? Or do we just like accept that, hey, we're going to have days where those come up and we just got to like sit in it and allow ourselves to feel it? Like, what would your advice be in that scenario?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think we really can get to a place where they don't come up as frequently, but I don't think the goal is ever for them to not come up. There's always going to be some doubt or some fear. And sometimes that's healthy. Sometimes we should doubt a decision because ultimately there's a different choice on the table that's better for us. Or sometimes we should feel fear in order to know like where we can go, right? So it's really about developing a healthy um relationship with these different emotions and knowing like, okay, I can say that this imposter syndrome came up and I know that it's not true. I know I can just like breathe through it and remind myself who I am or just let it pass. And something that I love even about the idea of meditation is that it's not about an absence of thoughts. It's about experiencing the thought and then being able to release it. And that's easier said than done, but with practice it really does come. And I think it takes you from this place of wanting to police every thought that you have, wanting to police all of your behaviors, to then just being like, I'm allowed to let things just move through me. And some of the doubts or some of the fears that we face maybe aren't even our own. Like we all have, energy receptors. And if someone is sending you negativity, whether they know it or not, or if we're just in town visiting family and then you have a lot of self-doubt afterwards, like we can connect the dots and kind of figure out, okay, maybe they weren't directly telling you these things, but what they stand for, what they even compliment or admire about other people, seeing that you don't have those qualities or seeing that you don't have those things, like even that sometimes can really throw you off kilter. Like, for example, my family is just like such a typical South Asian family, and that my cousins are, aerospace engineers and computer science people and doctors and lawyers. Like I literally have those four, there's five of us cousins and there's those four professions and then there's me. And it's just like, cool. Like it's just, and everyone gets so rewarded and so congratulated for having these big careers and for working for SpaceX and working for Tesla and working for Apple and all of these things. And I just sit there and I'm like, that's not my dream, but it is making me doubt myself. It's making me feel like I'm not doing this adult thing right, and I'm the oldest one, so like what's wrong with me? But learning that I have my own path and reminding myself that I chose not to do those things for a reason. They're not where I'm supposed to be. And that I have to be able to appreciate my own journey, and especially doing things like what we do, being a healer, being, any kind of like medium, just doing any of this work. It's not always well received, and it's not well received by a lot of people who just don't get it. But then there's people who tell you, I've been looking for this work my entire life and that's what I do this for. And so the doubt is so normal and so natural. And something that I want to mention as well is that our inner critic is the internalized voice of our childhood bullies. I talk about this all the time, but when I really started to dive into my imposter syndrome, my biggest critic, the voice in my head that's telling me that I'm stupid and I should have done better and all of these things, it's exactly what my mom's voice sounded like. It's exactly what I've heard so much in my life. And of course, there's a part of us that internalized that, because I would like, as children, with the way that our brains work, you would rather be able to anticipate the way that someone is going to shame you and avoid that before going through the actual process of them externalizing that shame and telling you that you're stupid. So we hold on to that, and we know every single thing that our parents would say about a certain decision, and we decide what to tell them and what to hide. And, we're always playing these kind of internal games to survive in this kind of childhood atmosphere. And so, of course, as you get older, we start to distance ourselves from that physical voice, but part of it is still living inside of us, and so being able to recognize, okay, that's this voice, that's where this is coming from, but that's not where my light is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're just like unlocking so many things in my brain right now. I'm like, that's so true. I feel like I have so much like journal work to do after this, which I'm very excited about. And so I think there's the black sheep journey, talking about self-worth and self-worth coaching, spirituality, tarot. Like, how did all of these things come together for you? And do you find that they kind of like weave into one another, or do you keep them separate? Like, how does that work for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I try to commingle as much as I can. The biggest separation really is between self-worth coaching and my tarot readings.
Right.
So the only reason that there's kind of a distance between that is because I've had clients who, have different religions or different spiritual beliefs, and I'm not going to force my beliefs on them. And so I am able to coach them in a way that doesn't use tarot or doesn't, dig too deep into spiritual practices, just to respect where they're coming from and where they're meeting me. But I always ask my self-worth coaching clients, would you like me to use tarot? Would you like to kind of dip into the spiritual realm? Because I also have a lot of people who are really interested in both, or I have a lot of people who have been reading tarot for years as well that want to come in and do some of this work. And so that's why I prioritize one-on-one clients so much. And I love working one-on-one with people because everyone's meeting me from a different place. And this gives us more, freedom and flexibility to really meet them where they are and start kind of connecting the dots back out into, believing that they're worthy or using certain tools that resonate with them and things like that. So any of my self-worth coaching clients, I mean, I really speak to the Black Sheep experience and the Black Sheep journey. And that's something that I'm working on as I redo my website and all of these things. And so that is very connected. And I would say a lot of Black Sheep also find me and want to have readings with me as well. So in terms of my services, Black Sheep are definitely a big part of all of that. But at the same time, I always say, if people resonate with my content, if they resonate with where I'm coming from, then they don't have to personally identify as a Black Sheep if they feel like that doesn't fit.
Right, right. Oh, I love that. Yeah, it seems like for those who are open to the spirituality side of it, that could be a really cool and beautiful like commingling of, tapping in, getting tarot readings, and also having like this guidance and help on building up the self-worth. So I think that that's like a very cool offering that you have.
Yeah, thank you. It's fun
Yeah.
too because a lot of my readings will, show me like rituals that the person should do or different things like that. And I'll send them, to them in an email so they have it written down and know, what processes to take. And sometimes even during coaching, I'll get certain channeled messages. And as long as they're receptive to hearing that, then I'll share them. And a lot of them resonate heavily. So it's just really beautiful to kind of have these different flexible ways in which I can connect with my clients.
Right, right. That's so cool. Well, like we were talking about earlier, it is a very charged time for a lot of people with the holidays and their families. So I guess for those people who are choosing to go home to the holidays, or they're spending a lot of time with their family, who may find that to be very triggering, who may have unhealed wounds, what would your guidance be to them to help them get through this time in a way that honors who they are and they're authentic to themselves, but they're also able to protect themselves?
Mhm. Absolutely. I think there's a couple of different ways that I can um, answer this, but one of the first things, if they're able to, I recommend having a different place to stay if possible. I wasn't able to do this on my trip home, and normally I would, stay with maybe a different family member, or if there's the possibility of a hotel or an Airbnb, just having that little bit of physical distance can really make a difference. But I know that's not always accessible for everyone, so if it's not, then I would honestly, something that I did is I energetically tried to prepare and cleanse the room before I arrived. And so I was staying in my childhood bedroom. Obviously, I'm familiar with what it looks like and how it feels. But something that I really struggled with is the last few times I'd gone to visit my parents, I had gotten sleep paralysis like really badly in my room. There was just like a weird, disturbing kind of energy there. And I didn't want, to experience that again. And so in my mind, I was almost like, I would describe it almost as like doing Reiki or doing like a cleansing, but from far away. And so, something that's interesting about my family dynamic is that my parents are very evangelical Christian, and that's how I was raised. And so, getting into tarot and spirituality is like very much against what they believe. And normally, I would even pack like maybe a tea light candle and some salt or something to just light that in the room, but I'm not able to have candles or incense or cleansing tools or any of that. So it really had to be done in a certain way that was going to be protected. So I visualized, cleansing energy in the space. And then I also visualized a lot of big boundaries around me. So I kind of visualized like this white light around my being, but at the same time, like layers of different colors of boundary, protection, confidence, clearly being able to speak, things like that. And so visualizing these like layers of light and energy around me also kind of reminded me of, this is who you are, this is how you're showing up, this is like you're allowed to do that. And it actually worked. Like all of my general, conversations and communications with people while I was there in my immediate family and my extended family went really positively. So I am dealing with some of the repercussions of feeling like the black sheep and feeling like I don't fit in now, but at least I'm in my home and in my own safe space to be able to process those. um Something else that I recommend as well is if you're able to record a voice note, like when you're home before you leave, just reminding you, it could be affirmations, it could be a few reminders, it could be a quote you like, it could just be you talking to yourself and being like, I know you're not going to feel great, like, but you're amazing, you're on the right path, trust your intuition, every decision you've made has been the right decision, it's okay to choose yourself, like saying all of these things and just listening to it, even in the bathroom or right before you go to sleep or right when you wake up, just reminds you a little bit of kind of who you are. And because we have to cut off some of that to be able to exist in this other space, right? And so having little pieces of that. And the final thing, I have so many more tips, but the last one I'll say is just to be able to have kind of a like a connection and a time to be okay with separating yourself from your intuition, if that makes sense. So I kept saying this to my cousin because we voice note all the time and she actually lives in the UK, but she's also like the only person I know in my family that's just as like spiritual and energetic as I am. So we really connect and bond over this. And she was a great resource because we were kind of reminding each other of our light in these different, dynamics. But something I kept saying to her was, I just cannot connect with my intuition while I'm here. And I know that was for a reason. It was like this block was just immediately there. And I think if it was open, my energy receptors would have just been pulling in so much negativity. I think that happened a little bit anyway, but not as much as, it would have if everything was so open. And so I think part of what happened is that I had to just like close these energetic receptors and these connections down to be able to survive and like make it okay. But now I'm at home and I'm kind of struggling with like, well, where is my intuition? Where is this connection? And so part of what I'm doing today is just actually sitting down and fully cleansing myself and, just making time to journal, making more time to hear my guides again. I've been meditating since I've been back. Just doing these little things to intentionally reconnect with where you are is so, so important. And so it's okay if you feel like you're leaving a piece of you behind. That might be what you need to do to survive there. So don't feel like you're being inauthentic. Don't feel like you're lying to yourself. Don't feel like you're hiding things. It's okay to take these precautions and to take these measurements to be able to get out of it as unscathed as you possibly can.
Right, right. I feel like you're just putting words that I didn't know that I needed to like an experience that I just had. I was just back in my hometown and I felt like I was in this weird energy and I didn't get a channeled message for over a week and I was freaking out. I was like, what is happening? But just hearing you explain that makes so much sense. And it took a few days after I was back to like get back in to the flow of things. But looking back, I could totally see how it was just, my higher self and spirit, like protecting me from taking on even more than I already was. Cause it was hard, but they were like, if your channels are open, then you're going to bring in more. So that makes a ton of sense.
It's interesting too, because like I always look at channeling or as these connections to spirit as like my saving grace. Like they're here to help me, they're here for me and or with me. But and it's interesting to feel like that like saving grace in a way is gone when you need it the most, but it really isn't. You know, it's just like it would just allow too much negativity to come in. But it's just interesting because we feel like, you know, this is when I need to hear these voices, or this is when I need to feel the most protected, and I don't. But it's by design.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, that's beautifully said. And something that I dealt when I was a teenager and probably up till the time I was 25, just had a deep self-hatred, like just the worst negative self-talk every day, putting myself down more than anyone ever could, behaviors that were very harmful to me. And I finally started to come out of that for, the past few years. And I thought that I had made it to loving myself. But until I got to this year, now I realized I was just feeling neutral towards myself. And I don't know if you experience some sort of in between, like, I don't, maybe you didn't have the self hatred that I did, but maybe you see people that go from, okay, I really used to not like myself. Now I'm okay. But you kind of want to get to the self-love piece, And so it's like, I think I had to recognize that there's a difference between just being neutral to yourself and loving yourself. But I didn't even know that I was in that neutral space. So I don't actually know what my question is with this, but I guess what is your reaction to me saying that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most interesting part is not knowing, right? There's so much that we are closed off to on ourselves, or we think that we feel a certain way and we really don't. And so, but the thing is that neutral space ultimately got you to loving yourself, right? And this is just the start of that journey too. Like that love will deepen and change and flow over time. But it really reminds me of the body positivity movement and how, you know, a lot of people were saying, well, maybe body positivity isn't the goal. Maybe it's body neutrality. And maybe I have to accept that I'm not always going to love my thighs, or I'm not always going to love my nose or my eyebrows or whatever it is, but I can feel okay with it. I can feel okay with not loving it. I can feel better than hating it. And that's just a bridge, right? That's just part of the process. And I think having that, when you have that baseline of self hatred, which is exactly how I felt as well, when I was saying before, like I was just constantly in pain. I didn't even recognize being in pain because it's all I ever was. And so going from that being your baseline to neutrality being your baseline is actually huge. And that's where the bulk of the work is that you've already done. To go from neutral to loving yourself is a much smaller jump than to go from hating yourself to neutral. And so it's so important to be able to respect that part of your journey. And, the murkiest, ugliest, most difficult parts are really that's where the work is. And that's where your light is shining more than you ever would recognize, because you had to go from that place of self-hatred to believing that there was a better, something better, that there was any version of feeling better, even though you'd never known that before. And so if in those moments where you don't love yourself, you're still going to a place of not completely hating yourself. And even if you were to hate yourself now, or something happens that makes you really question yourself and really kind of go into this dark space, you now have the life experience of loving yourself. You now have the life experience of being neutral. And so even if you were to, like, quote unquote, slip back into these feelings of hatred, you still have so much more evidence that there's other ways to feel about yourself that have been built up, that only you have been able to build for yourself. And through that, can more easily dig yourself out of these spots of dislike or hatred.
Yeah, yeah. No, I that makes a lot of sense. And I think if so I'm 29 now. If 19-year-old me knew how I felt about myself now, I wouldn't believe it. I would be like, there's no way that I could not only be like okay with myself, but love myself. But to your point, when you're that deep into it, it seems like neutrality is actually just a really great place to aim for, because if it can feel like a really big leap to go from, oh my gosh, I am like there's no one else in this world that dislikes me more than me, to, okay, I have to completely love myself. So I think if maybe I had approached it, of like, okay, I just need to be okay with myself and then the rest will come in time, that feels a lot less daunting of a task to try and achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. It gives you a little bit of space to just,
Mhm.
that you've never given yourself before, that no one else has ever given you before.
Yeah. Yeah. And can you tell us a little bit more about the services that you offer?
Right now, I have pared back on group coaching sessions and things like that. But what I'm really focusing on, again, is my love for one on one work. And this was even one of those experiences where I've had business coaches tell me, like, it's not a good business decision to do that. Or it's not, as a coach, you need to be offering like these big, big workshops and big, memberships and all of these things. And against all the advice, like, I've listened to my intuition and realized, like, this really is where I want to be. And the amount of work that I've seen people do in 1 hour, or the amount of progress I've seen people make in 3 sessions, 5 sessions, is insane. And one of my biggest goals as a coach is I want us to work together for a time period, but I don't like, if you don't come back to me, but you have great things to say, that's my biggest goal. I don't want you to depend on me. I'm not here to fix things for you, but so many Black sheep have never been safely held in any kind of container. And as children, we're not allowed to cry. We're not allowed to throw tantrums. We're not allowed to do all of these things that are maybe annoying, but are natural expressions of our real emotions and our little brains and our little bodies really reacting to things that don't feel right in our atmosphere and in our environments. And so to finally be able to have someone that holds space for you in a way that isn't your partner and isn't your best friend and isn't, these people that also see you in other lights and that maybe you're afraid to be fully vulnerable around, having someone just accept you, whether you're crying in a session or whether you're happy or whatever it is. I think that's so powerful. And I I just love working with people one on one, and I've seen the difference that it can make for people. And the last thing that I just kind of want to say here is that so many Black sheep also have such a deep fear of vulnerability, and I understand that because we weren't allowed to just be seen as ourselves, and we always had to live in this space of policing ourselves and shutting ourselves down or telling ourselves, like, I'll tell them that later, or writing it in our journals instead of actually expressing it to someone. And I deeply relate to so much of that. And that's another reason why I'm kind of taking a little bit of a space. Like, I do think community is so important. And I think community care is so foundational for a better world. And that's something that I hope to be able to introduce later on. But right now, it is so important to have someone that can just witness you and someone that can just see you, and to remove the peer pressure and remove like all of these other voices and energies, and to have someone just really tap into where you are and be able to show up as your full self. Like, I've had people who, and I don't advise this, but I've had people who don't even want to turn their camera on during a coaching session or during a reading, and I'm giving a reading to like a black screen. But if that's how they need to show up, then that's how they need to show up. And sometimes they'll still be, in tears, or just, just saying like how much it still resonated with them. And so wherever you start from, that's where I want to meet you. And so, I'm launching a new brand called the Black Sheep Experience. And hopefully by the time this podcast goes live, or maybe a little bit after, my new website will be up. So I really encourage anyone who's interested or anyone who's resonated with my work to go to that new website and check it out. It's going to be blacksheepexperience.com.
So cool. I'm so excited to see that flourish. I know that like that is such a necessary thing that's needed for so many people. And are you, so as part of what you're doing, like uncovering, because like you said, sometimes we don't even know that we are feeling these things or that we have these beliefs on us. So as part of what you're doing, uncovering what those beliefs even are that we have from our childhood?
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of what I do is really heavily education based. And, it takes a lot of work and a lot of time to show up, but that's a big goal of my content creation on social media and on my podcast, is to let people know, like, where they're standing, and kind of to like shed light on the experience itself, because the black sheep journey is its own experience, but even the thoughts that people have, the beliefs that people have, like if you knew your limiting belief was a limiting belief, then it wouldn't be a limiting belief. Like we just see life in this black and white way, or we see like things in this bucket of what I can do and what I can't do, and a lot of times the things that you can do are only things that you've done before, and that's why your life looks the same all the time, and you're craving this change, you're craving this difference, but you have no idea that there's other possibilities available to you. And so there's a heavy layer, and it can take time for clients to be able to recognize themselves in the things that I'm saying. But that's why I try to just show up as consistently as I can, and just, allow myself to be kind of a consistent resource in that way. And so on the business side, it definitely makes things difficult, even with things like SEO. Like I don't know what people will be Googling when they're looking for me, because they most likely won't be Googling self-worth coach or black sheep experience, But at the same time, like when people find me, they resonate with me almost immediately, because I'm putting a voice and a language and words to experiences that they have had their whole lives and didn't even know was an experience, or didn't even know that's different from what other people are going through.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, just by talking to you today, I feel like I have gained so many just like little nuggets of wisdom that I'm excited to like dive more into and think more about. And I feel like a lot of this will be sticking with me. So I can only imagine the amount of insight and wisdom and growth that comes from meeting with you one-on-one and really diving into that. So for anyone who is listening, who has resonated with what we've been saying, absolutely go check out Roshni's self-worth coaching. It sounds absolutely incredible.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if you're up for it, I would love to get your take on a listener email that we have.
Absolutely.
Okay. It's a short one. It says, Dear Katie and guest, I'm just starting to learn tarot, but I'm struggling to put it all together in a message that makes sense. I've gotten to the point where I don't have to look up the meaning of each card, but I'm not sure how to channel the rest of the message. I also find that sometimes it's easier when I read for other people than it is than when I read for myself. Any advice? Thank you for all you do. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love that. So if you feel comfortable with the definition of each card, something that helps me is writing it out. So I recommend two main things. One, a particular spread. So like if you have a 3-card spread, even if that's past, present, future, or if that's, the 2 decisions, and you could do 4 cards, 2 decisions, and the outcome of each decision, like having a very specific spread and placement for each card is going to be helpful to give each card context. And then something else I would do is, if you have a journal or just a piece of paper, write out 3 of cups means, and then whatever it means to you, like celebration, family, whatever. And then doing that for all 3 cards in your spread, and then just trying to kind of put it together in a paragraph, or almost in a puzzle piece of like, okay, I got the 3 of cups, the 5 of pentacles, and the tower card. Okay, I know this card means these positive things. I know this card means these feelings of not feeling very, positive about myself. I can see that the Tower card represents change. So am I changing when it comes to my relationships with friends and family? Am I changing when it comes to my self-perception? And sometimes being able to just kind of write it out, or even do like a stream of consciousness bit of writing after you define the 3 cards, can sometimes help you kind of fit it all together. And especially if you feel comfortable reading for other people, you do have a way of being able to channel and piece these messages together. So now it's just kind of like, how can you unblock that same connection for yourself?
Right, right. No, I love that advice. You're so good at giving like concrete steps to do, which I love, because I feel like that's something I struggle with. So it's so cool to have, like a physical thing that someone can go do to like practice this. So I love that, that's the direction that you take so many things. I think it's so helpful to people. For me, when I was learning to read tarot, it was super helpful to, have specific placements, like you said, like a specific spread. And then I would also just kind of like absorb it, take it in, and then immediately go meditate, but mostly for the point of receiving messages based on the tarot spread that I just did. And that seemed to help me. And then it got to the point where I didn't necessarily need to do that to get the message because I was able to kind of bridge that gap. But that might be something for this person to try too. But I love everything you said. I think that's a really great way for people to dip their toe in, start to learn more because it can feel really overwhelming to try and learn tarot. I know it felt overwhelming to me at the beginning, and I didn't really know where to start. So I love everything that you just said.
Yeah, me too. And what you said too is connects kind of to our what we were saying about autopilot. We get these channeled messages when we're just doing the basic things. And so entering that kind of state of autopilot with the meditation, like you said, is perfect because this person can channel. They do have the resources and the understanding. They just need to allow that to kind of integrate within their own selves.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I hope that helped our listener. And before we wrap up, I just have a few last little questions for you. And the first one is if you could tell your younger self one thing, what would it be?
Mm. I would tell them that they're right. I feel like I spent so much time thinking I was wrong about every little thing. And if I just heard someone that I trusted tell me that I was right about something, I think it would have gone a long way.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I love that. In your darkest hour, what keeps you going?
Oof. I would say partially just knowing that I've been through darker things,
Mm.
but in a more concrete way, I would say my partner, my dog, the walks that I take, and rewatching Gilmore Girls for the millionth time.
Love it. Absolutely love it. What's one thing that you've done for yourself recently that you are grateful to yourself for?
Giving myself space from my goals.
I love that. Wait, can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. Well, I've been balancing and managing so many goals. Like I applied and got this part-time job really recently, but I've also had this goal of making my website public by December 15th. And I was just graduated a small business class and I've been doing like a million and one things. And I've been getting to a place of feeling overwhelmed and almost at a point of like not burnout, but like recognizing the first signs of what that looks like because I've been burned out so many times before. And so allowing myself the space to say, like, yes, you have discipline. Yes, you can do these things, but also you're most important. And the best thing you can do for yourself is just to stop replaying this deadline in your mind and to stop thinking about the goals and measuring how far or how close are you, just giving yourself like grace to remember that you are separate from your goals. Like I see myself in my output and in my productivity so much. And it's easy when you feel overwhelmed to get so drawn again to that urgency, that black and white thinking. I'm either going to do it all or I'm going to fuck everything up. Like, and so having a little bit of balance and space to say, I'm a person first, everything else can wait. And sometimes it's just that small acknowledgement that allows me to like come up for air.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I think especially as entrepreneurs too, like it's just this feeling of you have to hustle constantly in order to get to where you want to go. And so to like come back to that and remember, I always have to tell, it's so stupid, but I always have to tell myself like Rome wasn't built in a day and neither is what you're doing. Like Rome is amazing and so is what you're doing. So like take your freaking time, you know?
Yes, I love that. And it's so weird too. It's such a mind warp to be a healer and be in this space of like time is like infinite and time doesn't matter and like all this stuff. And then you're over here like, I have deadlines, I have things to get done, I have 7 meetings today. Like it's just
Yes.
so weird to like hold space for this deep energy and then at the same time be like, but I still live in this capitalistic world and my
Right.
clients are waiting on me and my audience is waiting on me and I'm waiting on me. And it's
Right.
just a lot to be able to navigate.
100%. Well, I love that, and I'm gonna try and give myself space for my goals too. What's something you're being too hard on yourself for, where you want to give yourself more grace?
Mm. definitely the launch of this rebrand and my website and all of these things. And I got UX certified earlier this year, and I did all these things for it. And I've noticed that when I get right to the end of meeting one of my goals, that's when I really start to freak out, and I have all this self-belief and confidence going up until like I'm 90 to 95% done. And then when I'm in that space, I'm like, shit, like I don't know where to go, I don't know what to do, like I am lost, and I want to immediately go back to square one, which is not the right thing to do at all. And so just kind of recognizing that that again is a pattern of mine, and just being able to say like, okay, yes, you're being really hard on yourself. Is that helping you though? And I know
Right,
it's
right.
not. But yeah, I really need to keep reminding myself to let myself like finish this goal or finish these things in a way that is is going to be healthy.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Last question. If you could give one piece of advice or words of encouragement to someone who's at the beginning of their spiritual journey, what would it be?
I would say that the external doesn't always reflect the internal. And I think this is just a message you need to hear at the beginning of your journey, because most likely your life doesn't look or feel how you want it to, or it's waking up to these external circumstances that makes you realize, wait, like I need change, I need to do something different. And so but then you go online or you go on TikTok or you go wherever, and everyone's telling you your inside is your outside, and maybe there was a past version of yourself inside that did build what you have, but when you're in that middle space of recognizing that it's not aligned anymore, recognizing that you need something different, to keep hearing that message is so tough. And so to just give yourself some grace and know that not everything is a direct reflection of your internal landscape, and that it takes time and it takes patience to change these things, but that it will reflect in your outside world as well. Just because you don't see it though, or just because something happens in your environment that triggers you, doesn't mean that you have to follow it up with a massive spiral.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I love that so much. I wish I had that at the beginning of my spiritual journey. So that's amazing. Well, Roshni, thank you so much. This has been absolutely incredible. I know I have learned so much from you, and I know my listeners will as well. So thank you so much for being here and for sharing your love and light with me today.
Thank you so much for holding space and asking these really beautiful questions. I feel like I really got to, I don't know, I got to shine because of like what, I don't know, what you pulled out of me. So thank you for that.
That wraps things up for this episode of Guided Souls. Thank you so much for being here with me today. It means the absolute world to me. This podcast truly is such a blessing to have in my life, and I get to keep doing it because all of you are listening. So thank you so much. And if you haven't already, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. And if you would like to be considered to have an email read on the podcast, you can email guidedsoullllc@gmail.com. Everything remains anonymous, and you might just hear your email on the podcast. As always, keep going. You are doing amazing, and I love you.